Coming to you live from Asahishi, Chiba Prefecture, Japan. This is the Kabukimono Chronicles with Mr. Kabukimono himself, Naoe Keiji. Good morning, guys, from Asahi. It's a beautiful Sunday morning, and originally I was supposed to do the episode last night, but I got caught up playing a little of Nobunaga no Yabo on the PlayStation 3, so I decided to procrastinate a little bit and wait until Sunday morning. Before we jump into episode 2, I'd like to apologize for my last episode. I had some complaints that the music was a little too loud and I was a little hard to hear in some segments. To prevent that from happening again, I decided to no longer use music, or at least loud music anymore. So bear with me, guys. I'm still learning how to use iMovie and GarageBand, and give me another 5 or 6 episodes, and I think I'll probably have it down. But again, my apologies for sounding, for just being hard to hear. So again, I'm sorry, and I'll be sure to check the volume adjustment the next time I use music. For today's episode, we will be talking about Japan itself. Where did it come from? What do people think about it? And the biggest question of all, what is Japan to me? So today's episode is divided into 3 parts. Part 1 is the definition of Japan. And it's not really a definition, it's more of a what I think the definition is. Part 2 is basic information about Japan. Population, ethnicity, where's it located, biggest cities, all that fun stuff you read in guidebooks. Just the real basic stuff. And then the last part is my own personal perspective about Japan and how did I come to thinking about it today. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So whenever you talk about a country, any country on earth, people have different ideas and different opinions about that certain country. For me, as an American growing up in the great state of Texas, I think Americans are loud, obnoxious, and love cheeseburgers. Okay, that was a joke. That was a joke. But you get the point that there are different stereotypes or different things that stand for different cultures. Japan is no different. For example, one of the most common things I see about when people talk about Japan is the media. Most specifically, anime, manga, video games, to a smaller extent, the pornography, and basically things you would find in Akihabara in East Tokyo. What you gotta understand is, although anime and manga and a good amount of video games are made over here, and more limited to anime and manga, you see more Japanese culture about school life or home life or social shit and all that fun stuff. That's only a small portion. Most manga and anime are just so grossly exaggerated. I mean, one of the best examples I can think of is the whole nosebleed gags. An old Japanese midwife's tale is when a young man, or I guess even a girl can get one also, when they're sexually aroused, they don't get an erection. You can't show that on Japanese TV. What they do instead is nosebleeds. But because nosebleeds are so common in anime and manga, it gets a sort of stereotype that, the Japanese are either really horny people or, I don't know, you figure it out. But what you see in anime and manga is so grossly exaggerated. And to the people who think they know Japanese culture because they see it in anime and manga, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're a fucking retard. Because it's just so exaggerated and it barely scratches the surface. And I apologize for my language also, but these weeaboos who think that they know Japanese and Japanese culture through anime and manga, it's just ridiculous. I mean, you don't go to an NFL game when you don't know football, and after one game you say, "Oh, well, I'm an expert at the NFL." I'm sorry, but that's bullshit. As someone who's played high school sports, and I know that's not amounting to much, but I apologize for that. My girlfriend just sent me a message over Facebook. Yes, I love you too, Ayaka. You have a good night. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. Anyway, what I was saying was you don't become an expert in football because you go to one game and boom, you know everything about it. No, I mean, you got to read the books, you got to read the rule book, you got to go to more games, you got to watch ESPN. It's the same way with Japanese culture. You got to go live in it. You have to read primary sources about culture. You can't watch all the freaking stupid anime and manga. And don't get me wrong, I do like manga, and to a smaller extent, I like some anime, but to be honest, anime these days suck really bad. They really do. Before I totally lose myself on a why I don't like anime rant, let's change the topic to another thing that most people think about. They think of the food: sushi, tempura, fugu, sashimi, or any of the sweet stuff, ampon or kompeto. And the food is just so good over here. I mean, I've lost almost 20 pounds being over here. And of course, being up in that frozen hellhole known as Hokkaido. The food was not good up there. I don't recommend Hokkaido food, especially if you're in ALT up there. You get fat really fast. But being here in Chiba, the food is much more healthier and it's better for the body. And of course, a lot of people who are dieting like to use Japanese food to help lose weight. The biggest reason for me is the warrior spirit of Japan, the concept of Bushido. Japanese history in itself has been long steeped in warfare. Ever since the 1100s, during the Genpei War, Taira versus Minamoto, the classic Japanese version of the Hatfields versus the McCoys, except this was for control over a government, not some backwater part of the southern United States where I have no idea where the Hatfields and McCoys are. I think they were in Tennessee or Kentucky. I don't give a shit. And then we get into the violence of the Muromachi period and the ineptitude of the Ashikaga shogunate. And because the Ashikaga shogunate could not hold on to the central government I wouldn't say for so long. I mean, they were in power from, God, 1300s up until 1573. Just the rise of the daimyo and the local states within Japan. You have to understand, during the Muromachi and the Azuchi, Japan was not a unified country. It was more like little mini states within an island. You could say, like, if the United States, all the states are fighting for supremacy, like it's Texas versus the rest of the 49 state. Oh no, screw Alaska and Hawaii. They're not attached to the continental. We'll just say the lower 48 states. What if they were all fighting for control and it's Texas versus everybody else, New York versus everybody else, and then you might see at some point there's a Florida, Georgia, Alabama coalition against Mississippi and Arkansas, or you get the idea. That's what happened during the Muromachi and for a good part of the Azuchi Momoyama period. After the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, when the Tokugawa shogunate was established, of course, this all came to an end. Everybody bowed to the Tokugawa, except for maybe Sanada Yukimura, Toyotomi Hideyori, and those guys who were all dispossessed after the Battle of Sekigahara. But I think all the history is best reserved for another podcast. Moving on to the last point, Japan is known for cutting edge technology. I mean, just recently I read an article about Sony having problems with this robotic dog that they had ever since like the early part of the 2000s. And, I found it absolutely fascinating that they could make such a thing. And also, I saw on NHK, which to you non Japanese people is basically like Japanese version of ABC, NBC, BBC, whatever C you have in your country, that they're now building robots to help take care of the graying population over here, helping the old folks get out of bed, help them take a bath, or help them feed their food. I found it to be absolutely fascinating because if it's a commercial success over here, I think it could really put the healthcare system in the United States, in a different a different kind of position. You wouldn't need the home caretaker anymore. That job would go kaput. You have a robot. Of course, you also see, vending machines that sell rice, used schoolgirls' panties. I have seen this. I wish I took a photo, but it was in Shinjuku. It was in Shinjuku. um, yeah, but you see vending machines that are dispensing iPads and rice, and there's even one in Asahi that dispenses fresh farm eggs. I haven't used it yet, but boy, would I love to. Or maybe you have your own definition of Japan that I never thought of. And if you do, leave it in the comment section because I'd love to see what y'all think of Japan. And I think we're going to close out this part of the podcast. So, what is Japan? What is the definition? Well, you're going to find out. So, to me, what is Japan? Pretty much, it goes like this. And of course, this is in my own words. So be sure to give me credit if you're going to use it in a paper. But then again, what do I care? To me, Japan is an island nation off the coast of mainland Asia that has developed a unique culture through assimilation of other Asian cultures via China, Korea, and India, yet is the only Asian country to have never been colonized by a Western power. As such, Japan has retained much of its cultural uniqueness due to its limited contact from Western influences from the years 1641 to 1853. Again, look at from the years 1641 to 1853. That is over 200 and I know I said 270, so I made a mistake. So my bad. It's over 210 years of cultural isolation. There is absolutely no Western influence within the Japanese islands. Of course, Japan had a limited trade partner in the Dutch in Nagasaki Harbor at the trade port of Dejima. So, Japan had some Western contact, but it was to a bare minimum, and you rarely ever saw any white or blacks, and I can't say any Latinos or anyone else in the Japanese islands outside of Dejima because they were not allowed in the Japanese islands. As such, Japanese culture was kept absolutely Japanese. But what did I mean by the unique culture through assimilation of other Asian cultures via China, Korea, and India? You see, most of Japanese culture is actually borrowed. And by borrowed, that's exactly what I mean. The Japanese are a nation of borrowers. For example, one of the biggest things that the Japanese borrowed from the Chinese was their writing system. Until they had a writing system, Japanese, everything was passed down orally. But when Chinese was brought over to Japan, they modified the Japanese, rather, I should say, the Japanese modified the Chinese writing system to fit the Japanese language. So, for example, In Japanese language, whenever you read, there are usually two readings. There is the onyomi, which is the Chinese reading, or close to Chinese reading of, it's really difficult to explain. Onyomi is the native Chinese reading in Chinese, but it's modified to Japanese. Kunyomi is the native Japanese reading, and it's made by the Japanese people. So if you're thinking of studying Japanese, onyomi and kunyomi, when you first go into it, it's really difficult. And it was only fairly recently, when I was still in Hokkaido, when I figured out when to use onyomi and when to use kunyomi. Had I known this 6 years earlier, I would be a lot more fluent in Japanese. But, better late than never, I guess. So we close out this part, and pretty much you have to understand Japan is unique because it's never been colonized by a Western power, but at the same time, it assimilated a lot from other Asian cultures. And now we get into the more basic facts about Japan. So let's just jump right into it. First, the national language of Japan is Nihongo, or Japanese. Of course, there are other languages that are spoken in Japan also. Ryukyuan, which is a language of Okinawa Prefecture. There's Amanigo, which is the language of the Amani Islands off the coast of Japan's southernmost, I should say, the 4 islands of Japan, the southernmost prefecture of Kagoshima. There's Ainu up in Hokkaido of the Ainu people. Of course, Ainu is a dying language, and when I lived in Akechi, I tried to learn Ainu, but it's just so hard, and I gave up after 2 pages of the book that I was using. Oh well. Of course, you guys know that the capital of Japan is Tokyo, or Tokyo for you non-Japanese speakers. Population of Japan is about 127 million, which is either top 10 or top 15. I'm not 100% sure. I think I'm going to go top 15 because, Japanese population is slowly shrinking, and we're going to dive into that problem a little bit later in this podcast. There are 47 prefectures in Japan. We'll go over the total list of the prefectures later. Another interesting fact about Japan is that 98.5% of the Japanese population is pure blood Japanese. Whenever I tell a Japanese person, I come from Italian, German, and other sorts of European descent, they look at me like I'm crazy. And you have to understand, it's because of this 98.5 pure blood population that Japan is the most homogenic country in the world, or one of the top homogenic countries in the world. After World War II came to an end, and after the American occupation forces left, the Japanese government has been run by the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, or LDP. One funny thing to note, despite being called liberal, the Liberal Democrats are not liberal at all. They're more similar to the American Republican Party. The current head of the LDP is Mr. Abe Shinzo. Don't really care for the guy, but I'd rather. Well, no, I'm going to be honest. I don't like the guy. I think he's a hawk, and it's his Abenomic bullshit that's really hurting the dollar-yen ratio. As of today, the current dollar yen ratio is $1 equals 120 yen. When the Democratic Party of Japan, the DJP, was in power, the yen value was $1 equals 70 yen. Had I been working in Japan during that time, I would be sending home money every week because I'd be making probably, we'll say, 1.3 times more money than what I'd be making now. Now that I'm making, you know, I don't mind saying this, I really don't. The average salary of an English teacher here in Japan is about 3 million yen, which in US dollars, if we're looking at the standard $1 equals 100 yen ratio, it's about 30K. But since now it's now 120 yen for every dollar, I'm making an equivalent of about 28K a year over here. Of course, I don't care. I mean, I know it's not going to be a permanent career, and I don't have a car. I don't have to worry about all that student loans and all that other crap that other people back in the States have to worry about. But going back to the LDP, you know, they want to get Japan into a more better direction from where they were from the 1960s and 1970s and the 1980s. That's when the Japanese economy was really, really good. Of course, the exchange rate was so much different back then. So, Um, yeah, so getting back to the LDP, they've been in power for about 60 years, other than the hiccups in the early part of the 1990s, and when they were ousted out of power from 2006. And I call this the musical chairs era of Japan because it seemed every year the prime minister would resign and another person would take his place. With the climax coming in 2011 after the East Japan Greater Earthquake, after Naoto Kan quit, that's when, was it Naoto Kan? Or Noda? Whoever it was. When I was in school in 2012, then Mr. Abe came back into power. He was actually the prime minister in, I think it was during the musical chairs part, but he got sick, so he had a very valid excuse for stepping down. Moving on to religion in Japan, Japanese religion is basically moved into two parts. You have the Japanese native religion of Shinto, and of course you have Buddhism. A common thing in Japanese life is Japanese people go through 4 different religions in their lifetime. First, when they're born, they're Shinto. When they get married, they're Shinto. When they die, they're Buddhist. And everything in between, they don't give a shit. Japan is one of the most agnostic countries in the world. And I use this term rather loosely because even though Japanese people say they're Shinto or they're Buddhist, or if you're in the small Christian minority over here, most of the time you just don't care. You really don't. Of course, during the Azuchi Momoyama, Buddhism took a really strong and violent approach. Of course, you have the Ishiyama Honganji in modern day Osaka, and you have Uesugi Kenshin, who is the reincarnate of Bishamonten, Buddhist god of war, and you have other guys like Takeda Shingen, who was I don't believe he was a priest, but he took like Buddhist vows or whatever the heck it was, and yeah. And I don't care for Takeda Shingen for a lot of reasons. One, he was a flaming guy. And he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was gay, but he screwed anything on two legs. Man, woman, horse, dog, statue. Takeda Shingen's one fucked up guy. I don't like him, period. I digress. Yeah. Shinto is the native religion for Japan. And Shinto believe that there are gods in everything. Absolutely everything. There's a god in this computer that I'm using to record the program right now. There's a god in the bed that I'm laying in right now. There's a god in the TV. There's a god in the rock on my window. There's a god in the water. There's a god in the tree. There's a god in the sky. Honestly, I find Shinto to be ridiculous, but the legends and what they talk about, I do find fascinating. Religious, absolutely ridiculous religious concept, but absolutely fascinating also. And to be honest, I find it a lot more believable than, say, Islam or Christianity. Of course, I'll save a Christian rant later for a later podcast. The Japanese islands are actually made out of a lot of little islands. I don't know all the island, like the total amount off the top of my head, but there are five main, I know it says four, but there are five main islands in Japan. The first island is Honshu, which houses all the major cities in Japan. If you travel in Japan, most of the time you will be in Honshu. The second major island is Hokkaido. Of course, being a former resident of Hokkaido, all I can say is it's snowy, it's cold, lots of farmland, and if you go east of Nuchitose Airport in Sapporo, if you're white, black, Latino, or not Asian, they'll want to kill you because they'll think you're Russian or Nigerian or Filipino, and they just don't like you. So stay away from East Hokkaido. Sapporo's okay. I like Sapporo. And I like Hakodate, Furano, Otaru. I recommend, if you have the chance to go to Sapporo during the winter, I recommend you go. Ooh-wee, it is cold and the streets are covered in snow, but boy, do I recommend going there. The third major island is Kyushu. Kyushu is the home to Fukuoka, Nagasaki, and Kagoshima. Kyushu is known to be the birthplace of the Japanese islands because the earliest Japanese people landed in Kyushu and then they worked their way up through West Japan into Kansai, into Shikoku, and then all the way up to modern day Aomori. And along the way, they were kicking out the native Japanese population, the Ainu, the Amishi, and I think there was one other group, I don't remember. Oh well. Shikoku is the smallest island, famous for the 88 Temple pilgrimage, which I plan on doing at some point. Shikoku is also famous for Chosokabe Motochika, Lord of Tosa Province, who unified the entire island in 1583 or 1582, I think, only to lose it 3 years later to Toyotomi Hideyoshi during his ambition to unify Japan after Oda Nobunaga died. And of course, the fifth major island, although most Japanese people would seem to disagree with me, is Okinawa. Of course, Okinawa is infamous for the US military bases and lots of bloodshed due to all the wars. Okinawa is also famous in itself because Okinawa was actually a tribute state to China. But during the Edo period, the Satsuma daimyo, which is of modern-day Kagoshima Prefecture, the Shimazu, took in the Ryukyu Kingdom, Okinawa's former name, the Ryukyu Kingdom as sort of a tribute state. And they did it secretly against the Chinese for over 200 years. And it was because of this, Satsuma got a lot of access to Chinese goods and was one of the forefront guys to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate during the Bakumatsu period in the mid 1800s. Now we're going to look at the more modern things for Japan. Now, I live in the twilight zone. I live in an urban and a rural environment. Approximately 91% of all Japanese people live in an urban environment. In addition, the average family size in Japan is really small. In the old days, you might see Japanese families with 5 or 6 kids. Of course, now this is not the case. The average family size is about 3. Of course, being an English teacher, I actually have a family on my Friday class that actually has 5 kids, 4 girls and 1 boy. And I thank that family for trying to repopulate the Japanese society. I do give them a pat on the back for that. The Japanese are a very group-oriented people. And there was, I don't remember which book it was. I think it was in the Hagakure that a samurai without a sword, a group, or a horse is not a samurai at all. Japanese people, on the whole, are like this. Japanese people belong to a group, whether it be a work group, a social group, any group in general. They belong to a group. Individualism is highly frowned upon. And there's another old saying that the nail that sticks up has to be hammered down. And, just that pretty much sums up Japan's group-oriented mindset. Another thing that resulted from this is the concept of honne and tatemae. Because Japan is an island country and most people live in the urban environment, and of course, living in an urban environment, it can be really difficult, especially if it's crowded. They have to put their feelings aside and they have to wear like a mask in front of everybody. This is what you call tatemae, or in Japan, looking at the kanji, tatemae means the facade you put up, literally standing in front. So if someone does something to piss you off, you don't yell, you don't get angry at them, you just keep your cool, but you show that you're not happy. Of course, I can't do this. If I'm pissed, I'm pissed. I will show it. Recently, I had a class that they all forgot to do their homework, and I broke tatemae, but of course, I'm a foreigner. I don't have to follow it. I try to do it as best I can, but this class, compounded with their talkativeness, I lost my tatemae. I was not happy, and I assigned them 3 pages of homework as a punishment. And of course, if they forget to do a single problem, if any of them forget, they're all getting 6 pages. Of course, I don't think it's going to happen. I think I delivered my point quite accurately to them. We already talked that the nation's history is deep in warfare, so we don't really need to go over that. Japan is the 3rd largest economy in the world, or is it? And doing further research, I really do think it's going to be the 3rd largest economy, and I think it's going to continue to decline because there's quite a few problems that the Japanese have. But to be honest, I think I'm going to save that rant for another podcast, and I'm going to introduce it later in the episode. And the last thing I want to go over in this part, as a man, I love Japanese women. I always have. I don't really care for American women. I think they're snobby, catty, and of course, with the rise of feminism, ugh, I hate that word. With the rise of feminism, uh, I just don't see Western girls attractive. I've always thought Asian women, on average, were a lot better looking. Of course, I'm not looking for a girl who's totally subservient under me. No way. That's not what I want. I want a girl who can stand up for herself. Fortunately for me, I have a Japanese girlfriend who can stand up for herself, and she gets the point across to me whenever I fuck up. And I've fucked up a few times. Of course, she has also. So, there's communication. Of course, you meet some Japanese girls who are looking for an easy meal ticket out of, in my case, there were a lot of women in Akeshi who saw me as a meal ticket out of Akeshi. And of course, I'm not going to sleep with a married man's wife. That's not cool. You don't do that. So be careful of the gaijin hunters. They'll get a special podcast later also. All right, we're going to quickly breeze through this again. Of course, 127 million people in the population, 98.5% pureblood Japanese. Let's talk about the more urban areas. What are the major areas of Japan? Of course, most of the major Japanese cities are in the Kanto or Kansai regions. Kanto is where Tokyo is located. Kansai is where Osaka and Kyoto and Kobe are located. I've lived in both areas, and to be honest, I prefer Kansai over Kanto, but at the same time, Kanto has its charms and more, I would say, better services than Kansai. But on the whole, Kansai people tend to be a lot more friendlier toward foreigners, and Kansai women, be careful of them. Sweet girls, but a little too pushy. Kanto people are a lot more reserved. They're typical Japanese. They're reserved. They try to avoid foreigners whenever possible. Of course, most of my friends... Wait a minute, that's a lie. I don't have any friends here in Kanto. They're all in frickin' Kansai. Or they're from the Kansai region, even if they live in Tokyo. Kanto women tend to be a lot more reserved. My girlfriend, she's shy, but she's not afraid to voice her opinion. Other major areas include the Sapporo, Nagoya, Fukuoka, and Hiroshima areas. And I also think Sendai, Kanazawa, and Kagoshima, and even Kochi in Shikoku, they're major areas also. The top 3 areas that I would recommend going to if you're a tourist, well, number 1's Tokyo. You have to. Most international flights come in through Tokyo Narita International Airport, so you're going to have to go through Narita anyway. Or, if you're lucky enough, I would recommend flying into Kansai. Fly into Kansai International Airport in Sakai, which is south of Osaka. Yeah, pretty much that will sum it up for this part. Now we're going to talk about the more regions in Japan. Starting from the top in the green region represents the entire island of Hokkaido. Of course, you guys know of Hokkaido. If you go east of New Chitose International Airport, they all want to kill you because you're not Japanese. You're something. But of course, Sapporo and West Hokkaido is absolutely wonderful. I recommend going there. The yellow region is what we know as the Tohoku region. These are the regions that include Aomori, Iwate, Miyagi, Akita, Yamagata, and Fukushima prefectures. When the tsunami hit Japan, this was the area, with the exception of Akita and Yamagata, the regions of Aomori, Iwate, Miyagi, and Fukushima were severely devastated by the tsunami. I personally believe that once the cleanup efforts are done, I really think that if they really put the effort into it, like when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were absolutely destroyed by the atomic bombs, they were rebuilt and they were rebuilt better than before. I personally think Sendai, Ishinomaki, and all the other areas that were devastated by the tsunami, if they can get enough capital and, investment, I think they can come out good as new, if not better. The red area represents the Kanto region. This includes Ibaraki, Tochigi, Gunma, Saitama, Chiba prefectures, and of course, Tokyo. I live in, on the map, I live in number 12 in Chiba. I live near the easternmost part of that prefecture. Kanto is where the power is. The biggest city, the biggest metropolis is in these prefectures, with the exception of, say, Gunma and Gunma and Ibaraki. The major Tokyo metropolis is in, of course, Chiba, Tokyo, Saitama, and to a smaller part, the Tochigi area. The light blue region represents the Chubu and the Hokuriku areas. We'll start with the Chubu area first. During the Azuchi Momoyama period, most of the major players of the Sengoku and Azuchi were located here. You have the Uesugi in you have the Uesugi in Niigata Prefecture. You have the Takeda of Nagano, or rather, in those days, Niigata was known as Echigo, and Nagano was known as Kai, or Kai Shinano. The Imagawa were located in the Shizuoka prefectures. But we're going to continue a little further on that. This is also the birth area of the three main unifiers of Japan. Oda Nobunaga, who was based out of Owari, which is modern-day Aichi Prefecture. You had Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was Nobunaga's best general, who was actually a farmer who rose through the ranks from farmer to soldier to lieutenant to captain, and then as a general for Oda Nobunaga, who eventually unified the country on Nobunaga's behalf after Nobunaga was assassinated in 1582. And then a little east beyond that, you have the former Mikawa Prefecture in eastern Aichi, where Tokugawa Ieyasu was from, who eventually defeated Hideyoshi's followers at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 in Gifu Prefecture, and that's where they established the Tokugawa Shogunate, but of course you guys already know that. The Hokuriku area is sparsely populated, but famous for Kanazawa and Niigata. The new bullet train that just opened up about a week ago, oh my god, I can't wait to go to Kanazawa for spring break. I'm going to have a special episode up there because I'm going to do independent research on Kanazawa's famous Kabukimono, or that's actually where this podcast name comes from, the Kabukimono. These lovable, cultured rogues of the Azuchi Momoyama. Although actually in history they were kind of seen as a public nuisance. But then again, I don't care. I like it. The dark purple in the middle of Japan represents the Kansai regions, which includes the areas of Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe, and Wakayama, and Shiga and Mie, to smaller extent for them. This is what I call the heart of Japan. All major Japanese history events happened here. And fortunately for everybody, the United States military did not bomb Kyoto during the war. So most of Kyoto, what you see is how it really was. Of course, minus all the modern stuff. I mean, there's no skyscrapers in Kyoto. There isn't. They're all in Osaka. But the food of Kansai is wonderful. The people are so friendly. The women are good. I guess if you're a girl, the boys are good too. They even have their own separate dialect, the Kansai dialect. I'm thinking at some point, before I go home to the United States, I'd like to do 1 year in Kansai. Even if I have to teach English, I owe it to myself to have some fun for 1 year. Oh, Kansai, how I miss you so much. The magenta island is Shikoku. This is the least populated island in Japan, but it's always warm and sunny over here. When I was doing my job search for my next location in Japan, I actually did a interview with a company in Tulsa, but I ended up deciding not taking it because I don't really want to drive everywhere. And believe me, when you drive in Hokkaido, ugh, I, I'm not going to talk about Hokkaido anymore this episode. You guys know my disdain toward that island. Anyway, there's not much in Shikoku. It's all farmland, the 88 temple pilgrimage. Other than that, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing much. Then again, I've never been there, so if you live there and you have any suggestions for me where to go, tell me, leave me a comment. The orange area represents Western Japan. The biggest city out here is Hiroshima and Okayama in Okayama Prefecture. Hiroshima, well, you know the story about Hiroshima. Okayama, famous for Miyamoto Musashi. I think he's from Okayama. Hyogo, maybe. He's from one of those. I don't remember which one. Finally, the gray island is Kyushu. I know absolutely nothing about Kyushu other than the fact that 3 major samurai clans, the Shimazu of Kagoshima, the Otomo of Oita, and the Ryuzoji of Saga, were all duking it out for total supremacy over the island during the Azuchi period. Other than that, I know diddly squat. And, well, the only thing I know about Kyushu is it's humid. It's really, really humid. And I don't like humid, so I'm going to avoid there as much as I can. Now let's briefly touch the Japanese economy. Unfortunately for me, I'm not an economics major. I scored a C in my college economics class. I know jack shit about economics. So here's what I do know. The currency of Japan is the yen. As of today's exchange rate on March 22nd, 2015, $1 equals 120 yen. This is shitty for Americans that work over here because you're losing 20% of your income because the average rate is $1, 100 yen. So I'm staying here until the yen stabilizes. Or if it doesn't, I'm up shit creek without a paddle, and I'll just have to go home anyway and bear some of the loss. Japanese economy's third largest in the world. We'll talk about why it is and why it's going to continue to suffer. Key exports are cars and car parts, semiconductors, Computer products and pornography. Japanese pornography is second to none. If you read a lot of anime or manga. Yeah, anyway. Japan is also very resource poor. So because of this, Japan has to import a lot of natural resources. The biggest three are oil, liquid natural gas, and lumber, which is surprising because all the trees in Hokkaido could be chopped down. But I guess they're not going to use Japanese wood for domestic use. Oh well, their loss. And that wraps up Japanese economy. Now we look at the current Japanese problems. Each of these are going to get their own separate podcasts, but I feel like it's good for me to introduce some of it already. First, the Japanese population is graying at an alarming rate. There's more old people than there are young people here, and I see it everywhere I go. This also leads to a lot of problems. First of all, the Japanese suffer from a lack of sex drive. Because Japanese men put in long hours at the office, and then after work, they have to go to corporate events like drinking parties or meeting with clients, or I don't know, depends on the industry. And because of this, when Japanese men come home, they're worn out. They don't want to have sex, they just want to go to bed. And of course, lack of sex increases the sex industry. When Japanese men do want to get their rocks off, they don't find a girlfriend, they don't have sex with their wife. They look at porn. And as I said, Japan is the porn capital of the world. Like I said last episode, you find porn next to the ice cream at 7-Eleven. And Japanese women are suffering from this because not only are they not having sex, they're not having kids. You're not replenishing the population, which of course makes the population grayer. And one of the biggest complaints I had in Hokkaido was a lot of the town's women, and remember, I worked for the town of Akechi Board of Education, a civil servant position. Of course, this brings money. And of course, a lot of the women who were married to fishermen and that their husbands were away at sea for weeks on end fishing, they wanted me to have sex and they wanted me to become daddy to their kids. And of course, like in the show Maury, I ain't nobody's baby mama. I'm not going to do that. Which of course is leading to the deteriorating family values. Parents are not together, mom's wanting to cheat, dad's wanting to get his rocks off to frickin' hentai. That's shocking. That's really shocking. Of course, this will get a separate podcast later. Of course, there's problems with China and Korea thanks to World War II and just a lot of animosity between them. Illegal immigration here is a major problem also, mainly from Nigeria, Indonesia, the Philippines, and other places in Southeast Asia. Nigerians are the main problem. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not racist by any means. I am not. However, from what I see, the Nigerians and the Filipinos seem to bring the most problems to Japan. Usually, sorry for that, I got a message. Usually because they're in cahoots with the Yakuza, mainly the Nigerians. The Filipinos are usually the unskilled laborers who come to the country and they just either overstay their visa or they just don't get one, period. And the final thing that I have the biggest problem with, xenophobia. As I said, the Japanese population is getting grayer. Old folks tend to hold on to older values, and the old folks see me as G.I. Joe from nearly 75 years ago. they see my grandfather who served in the military at that time and not me. I'm not going to continue with that because that's a podcast in itself for xenophobia. All right, guys, that'll do it for today. I had a lot of fun telling you all the basics about Japan, and maybe I give you all some new questions that y'all never thought about. Um, Feel free to leave a comment or message me here, and I look forward to doing another show with y'all next week. And we'll soon be having our first special guest on the show with Mr. Goro Goro Roller from YouTube. He was actually one of my really close friends from Hokkaido, and we will be visiting Kanamata Matsuri in Kanagawa Prefecture in 2 weeks. So we'll have a special show for that in 2 weeks. So y'all take it easy, and this is Mr. Kabukimono Naoi Keiji signing off. Sayonara, yo!